I think I didn't do anything wrong, just told the truth about how my husband could never measure up to my ex. But when he handed me those divorce papers, I realized maybe I'd underestimated him and overestimated how much I controlled the story. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. Looking back now, sitting in this cramped studio apartment that's all I can afford, I wonder if I should have seen the signs. But honestly, Nathan had been so passive for so long that I never imagined he had it in him to fight back. I thought I knew exactly who I was dealing with. A quiet, predictable IT manager who would put up with anything to keep the peace. I was wrong about a lot of things. It started at Nathan's birthday party, or rather, it started long before that, but the party was where everything began to unravel. I'd organized the whole thing myself, invited both our families and some friends over to our suburban home. The living room was decorated with balloons and streamers, and I'd even made his favorite chocolate cake from scratch. I wanted everyone to see what a good wife I was. But as the evening wore on, watching Nathan fumble through conversations with the guests, I couldn't help myself. The comparisons just slipped out. "Oh, Nathan's never been much of a storyteller," I laughed when he was trying to tell our neighbor about a work project. My ex, Lucas, now he could hold a room captive for hours with his stories. Nathan's face tightened slightly, but he just nodded and excused himself to get more drinks. My mother, Janet, chuckled along with me. "Perdita's right," she said. "That Lucas boy was quite the charmer. Remember how he used to—" "Mom," I said, but I was smiling. It felt good to have someone validate what I was thinking. Nathan's parents, Doris and Graham, exchanged a look across the room. His sister Nina was helping in the kitchen, but I could see her watching through the doorway, her expression unreadable. Later, when Nathan was struggling to open a bottle of wine, the cork kept breaking, I couldn't resist another comment. "Lucas always had such strong hands," I said to no one in particular, loud enough for the room to hear. "He could open anything." The conversation died. Our 7-year-old daughter, Ella, who had been playing quietly in the corner, looked up with wide eyes. Nathan finally got the bottle open, poured wine for everyone with steady hands, and continued as if nothing had happened. "Just joking, honey," I said when I caught his eye. "You know I'm just teasing." But I wasn't joking, and we both knew it. I was telling the truth, and the truth was that Nathan had always been lacking. He was safe, reliable, boring, everything Lucas wasn't. If that made people uncomfortable, well, maybe they needed to hear it. After the guests left, Nathan was unusually quiet as we cleaned up. Ella had gone to bed, and the house felt hollow with just the two of us moving around, picking up plates and glasses. "Did you have to do that?" he asked finally, not looking at me as he loaded the dishwasher. "Do what?" "You know what." I sighed dramatically. "Nathan, they were just harmless jokes. You're being too sensitive." He paused, his hand still on the dishes, and for a moment I thought he might actually fight back. But then he just nodded, the same way he always did, and continued cleaning. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed with a text from Lucas. Heard through the grapevine it was Nathan's birthday. "Hope you're doing well." I smiled, typing back quickly. Same old Nathan, same old everything. His response came immediately. "You deserve better than same old, Perdita." I glanced toward the bathroom where Nathan was brushing his teeth, humming tunelessly to himself, completely oblivious to the world around him. Lucas was right. I did deserve better. What I didn't notice was Nathan standing in the hallway, having overheard my latest comment about his storytelling abilities to our neighbor as they were leaving. What I didn't see was the way his jaw had tightened, or how he'd quietly pulled out his phone and started recording. The game was changing, but I was still playing by the old rules. 2 weeks later, we were at Marcello's, our usual group dinner spot downtown. It was supposed to be a celebration. Our friends the Hendersons had gotten a promotion, But somehow the conversation kept circling back to my dissatisfaction with Nathan. "He just doesn't try anymore," I said, gesturing toward Nathan with my wine glass. He was sitting quietly, cutting his pasta into precise pieces, the way he always did. "I mean, when was the last time you surprised me with anything, Nathan?" "I brought you coffee in bed last Tuesday," he said quietly. "Coffee," I repeated, rolling my eyes at our friends. Lucas used to surprise me with weekend trips to the coast, concerts, actual adventures. Coffee in bed is what you do for someone you're taking care of, not someone you're in love with. The table went quiet. Sarah Henderson looked uncomfortable, her husband Mark suddenly very interested in his wine glass. My mother, who had joined us, nodded sympathetically. "Perdita's always been spontaneous," Janet said. "She needs someone who can match her energy." Nathan's mother, Doris, sitting across from me, set down her fork with a sharp clink. "Nathan works 60-hour weeks to provide for his family," she said, her voice tight. "Maybe appreciation might inspire more romance than constant criticism." "I appreciate him," I protested. "I just think he could learn a thing or two from Lucas," Nathan finished. "Yes, we've established that." There was something different in his tone, a flatness that made me pause. But then Lucas himself appeared at our table. I'd mentioned we'd be here when we'd been texting, and the dynamic shifted entirely. "Perdita," Lucas grinned, leaning down to kiss my cheek. "And Nathan, good to see you, man." Nathan nodded politely, but I noticed his hand tighten around his water glass. Lucas was everything Nathan wasn't. Tall where Nathan was average, effortlessly charming where Nathan was awkward, confident where Nathan was reserved. He regaled the table with stories about his latest photography project, his upcoming gallery showing, his spontaneous trip to Portland last weekend. "That's what I'm talking about," I said, perhaps louder than necessary. "Living life, taking chances. Some people are content with routine, but others—" I shrugged, letting the implication hang in the air. Nathan excused himself to the bathroom. While he was gone, Lucas leaned closer to me. "You seem frustrated," he said quietly. "Wouldn't you be?" He glanced toward the bathroom, then back at me. "Maybe we should catch up properly sometime, just the two of us." My heart raced. "I'd like that." When Nathan returned, Doris was gathering her purse. "We should go," she announced, not looking at me. "Graham, get the car." As they left, I heard Nina mutter something to Nathan that sounded like, "You don't deserve this," but I chose to ignore it. The evening ended awkwardly, with most of our friends making excuses to leave early. Only my mother stayed to finish her wine, telling me how proud she was that I wasn't settling for less than I deserved. Nathan was quiet on the drive home. When we got to the house, he went straight to his home office and closed the door. I could hear him on the phone, but I was too busy texting Lucas to pay attention. Tonight was nice. When can we have that catch-up? Soon. You deserve someone who appreciates you, Perdita. I fell asleep smiling, completely missing the fact that Nathan had been quietly photographing receipts and checking his phone logs. I didn't notice that he'd changed the password on our joint bank account. I was too focused on the attention I was finally getting from someone who understood me. The next day, Ella came home from school with a note from her teacher about acting out and seeming distracted and anxious. When I asked her about it, she just shrugged and went to her room. But I was too wrapped up in planning my next meeting with Lucas to connect the dots. The affair began 3 weeks later, in the most cliché way possible, at Lucas's downtown apartment after I'd told Nathan I was working late on a quarterly report. Lucas had texted me that morning with a simple message. "Free tonight? I have wine and actual conversation." I spent the entire day at my office job, barely able to concentrate, fielding calls and filing paperwork while my mind was elsewhere. My coworker Jennifer noticed my distraction. "You seem different lately," she said during our lunch break. "Happier?" "Just excited about some changes," I replied, checking my phone for the third time in 10 minutes. Lucas's apartment was everything our suburban home wasn't: minimalist, artistic, filled with his photography and expensive furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine. We talked for hours about art, travel, dreams we'd put on hold. He listened to me in a way Nathan never did, really listened, asking follow-up questions and remembering details from previous conversations. "You're wasted in that marriage," he said as we sat close together on his leather sofa. "You're this vibrant, intelligent woman, and you're married to someone who treats you like a roommate." "Nathan's not a bad person," I said, though even I could hear how half-hearted it sounded. "Bad? No. Wrong for you, absolutely." When he kissed me, it felt like coming alive after years of sleepwalking. I drove home that night with the radio up loud, feeling more like myself than I had in years. Nathan was already asleep, and I slipped into bed beside him, careful not to wake him. He stirred slightly, mumbling something about how late it was, and I told him the report had taken longer than expected. "Sorry, honey. You know how these quarterly reviews are." He just nodded and went back to sleep. Over the next few weeks, the lies became easier. Late nights at the office became dinner dates with Lucas. Weekend errands became afternoon visits to his apartment. I deleted text messages as quickly as I received them and made sure to complain loudly about my increased workload whenever Nathan was around. "They're really piling it on at the office," I'd sigh dramatically. "I might be late again tomorrow." Nathan would just nod, the same passive acceptance he'd always shown, and I'd feel a mix of relief and contempt. How could he not see what was happening? How could he be so completely clueless about his own wife? But Nathan wasn't as clueless as I thought. His behavior had started to shift in subtle ways. He was polite but distant. He'd started locking his phone, and I'd catch him watching me sometimes, with an expression I couldn't read. The first real sign of trouble came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at my desk when someone slipped an envelope under my keyboard while I was in the bathroom. Inside were printouts of text messages between Lucas and me. Not the innocent ones, but the intimate ones. The ones where we talked about meeting up, about what we wanted to do to each other, about how unfulfilling my marriage was. My hands shook as I read through them. How had someone gotten these? I'd been so careful to delete everything. I looked around the office, studying my co-workers' faces, trying to figure out who might have done this. Jennifer was on a call, Marcus was at lunch, and everyone else seemed focused on their work. It had to be someone with access to my phone or computer, but I couldn't figure out how. That evening, I confronted Nathan as casually as I could. "Have you been going through my phone?" He looked up from his laptop, genuinely confused. "What? No, why would I do that?" "Someone at work has been spreading rumors. I just wondered if you'd heard anything." "What kind of rumors?" I studied his face, looking for any sign of deception, but he just looked tired and mildly concerned. Classic Nathan, too passive to be devious. "Nothing important," I said. "Just office drama." He nodded and went back to his laptop, but I noticed he was looking at what appeared to be bank statements and legal documents. When I tried to get a closer look, he closed the screen. "Work stuff," he said simply. I shrugged it off. Nathan was always dealing with boring IT projects and financial planning. It never occurred to me that the work stuff might involve documenting my activities, tracking my whereabouts, or building a case against me. Meanwhile, Lucas was becoming increasingly nervous about our relationship. "Maybe we should cool it for a while," he said one evening as we lay in his bed. "I don't want to cause problems in your marriage." "What problems?" I laughed. "Nathan doesn't suspect anything. He's too wrapped up in his own little world to notice what's happening right in front of him." But even as I said it, I was thinking about those printed messages, about Nathan's recent distance, about the way his sister Nina had confronted me at Ella's school pickup the week before. "What you're doing to my brother is disgusting," she'd said, her voice low and angry. "He deserves so much better than this." "I don't know what you think you know," I'd started. "I know enough," she'd cut me off, "and if you don't stop, Someone's going to make sure he knows too. At the time, I dismissed it as empty threats from an overprotective sister. But now, holding those printed messages, I wondered if Nina had been more involved than I'd realized. Still, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. Nathan was Nathan, predictable, passive, and completely oblivious to anything that didn't involve computers or spreadsheets. The anonymous messages were probably just a jealous coworker or someone who had a crush on Nathan and wanted to cause trouble. I was so confident in my assessment that I didn't even bother to be more careful. If anything, I became more brazen, more open about my dissatisfaction with my marriage and my admiration for Lucas. I had no idea that every complaint I made, every comparison I drew, every public humiliation I subjected Nathan to was being carefully documented and would soon be used against me in ways I never could have imagined. The breaking point came at Ella's school spring festival. It was one of those mandatory parent events where everyone pretended to care about the children's art projects while really just gossiping about each other. Nathan and I had arrived separately. I'd been at Lucas's apartment and told Nathan I was coming straight from work. We were standing with a group of other parents, watching the kids perform some song about friendship when Mrs. Patterson, Ella's teacher, mentioned how well Nathan had been helping with the school's new computer system. "He's been so patient with our technical difficulties," she gushed, "staying after hours, never charging us for his time. Ella's lucky to have such a dedicated father." I felt all eyes turned to me, expecting me to beam with pride or add to the praise. Instead, I heard myself saying, "Well, Nathan's always been better with computers than people. At least the computers appreciate the effort." The group went quiet. Mrs. Patterson's smile faltered. I continued, somehow unable to stop myself. "It's nice that he's found something he's actually good at. Not everyone can be naturally charismatic." I glanced around the circle of parents. My ex was one of those people who could charm anyone, fix anything, make you feel like the most important person in the world. But we can't all be Lucas, can we, Nathan? Nathan didn't respond. He just stood there, his face completely expressionless, watching our daughter sing on the little makeshift stage. The other parents began to drift away, suddenly very interested in the craft tables or the bake sale. Mrs. Patterson mumbled something about checking on the sound system and hurried off. Doris, who had come to watch Ella perform, walked up to me with tears in her eyes. "How dare you?" she whispered. "How dare you humiliate him like that in front of everyone?" "You were just being cruel," she said, loud enough for the remaining parents to hear. "That man works himself to the bone for you and Ella, and this is how you repay him." She turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone while Nathan continued to watch Ella's performance as if nothing had happened. After the festival, Nina cornered me in the parking lot while Nathan was helping Ella into the car. "That's it," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "I've watched you tear him down for months, and I'm done. He's done. You think he doesn't notice what you're doing, but he sees everything. And soon, everyone else will too." "You don't know what you're talking about," I snapped. "My marriage is none of your business." "It became my business when you started parading your affair around town and humiliating my brother in public." My blood went cold. "What affair?" Nina laughed bitterly. "Please, everyone knows about Lucas. The only question is when Nathan's going to stop pretending he doesn't." That night, I tried to smooth things over at home. I made Nathan's favorite dinner, opened a bottle of wine, and attempted to explain away my comments at the school. "I was just stressed about work," I said, as we sat at our dining room table. "You know I don't mean those things." Nathan cut his chicken methodically, not looking up. "Don't you?" "Of course not. I was just, I don't know, trying to be funny. Sometimes my humor doesn't land right." "Humor," he repeated flatly. "Yes, humor. Bad timing, maybe, but—" "Perdita," he said, finally looking at me. "Do you love me?" The question caught me off guard. What kind of question is that? A simple one. "Do you love me?" I stared at him, this man I'd married 9 years ago, this father of my child, this person who had become so familiar, he was practically invisible. Did I love him? Had I ever really loved him? Or had I just loved the security he represented? "Of course I love you," I said, but even I could hear how unconvincing it sounded. Nathan nodded, the same passive nod he'd been giving me for years, and went back to his dinner. Later that evening, while Nathan was reading Ella a bedtime story, I went to our bedroom to get ready for bed. That's when I noticed it. Nathan's side of the closet was empty. His dresser drawers were cleaned out. His toiletries were gone from the bathroom. On the kitchen table, where I couldn't possibly miss it, was a formal letter from Hartwell and Associates Family Law. My hands trembled as I opened it. The words swam before my eyes. Dissolution of marriage, irreconcilable differences, custody arrangements, asset division. Nathan appeared in the kitchen doorway, still calm, still quiet. "What is this?" I demanded, waving the letter. "Divorce papers," he said simply. "You can't be serious. Over some stupid comments?" "Nathan, I said I was sorry." "This isn't about the comments, Perdita. This is about Lucas." The name hung in the air between us like a physical thing. I felt my carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. "I don't know what you think you know." "I know everything," he said, and for the first time in years his voice had real strength in it. "Every lie, every meeting, every text message. I know about the apartment visits, the fake work emergencies, the way you've been planning to leave me for months." I sank into a kitchen chair, the letter still clutched in my hands. "Nathan, we can work this out. We can go to counseling, we can—" "No," he said. "We can't." He turned to go, then paused at the doorway. "I've already filed the papers. You'll be hearing from my attorney." And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the divorce papers and the sudden, terrifying realization that quiet, passive Nathan had been playing a completely different game than I thought. The meeting at Hartwell and Associates was scheduled for the following Thursday at 2 p.m. I'd spent the intervening days trying to reach Nathan, calling his office, texting him, even showing up at his mother's house where I assumed he was staying. But Nathan had become a ghost, present for Ella's needs, polite but distant when we had to interact, and completely unreachable when I wanted to talk about our marriage. I'd hired my own lawyer, a woman named Patricia Morse, who specialized in protecting women's interests in divorce proceedings. She was expensive, but my mother had insisted on paying for her. "Nathan's always been vindictive," Janet had said, which was laughable since Nathan had never been vindictive about anything in his entire life. "We need to make sure he doesn't take advantage of you." But sitting in the conference room at Nathan's lawyer's office, looking across the polished table at my husband and his attorney, I realized I might have misunderstood who was taking advantage of whom. Nathan's lawyer, David Hartwell, was a thin, precise man in his 50s who laid out documents with the methodical care of someone who had done this many times before. Nathan sat beside him, wearing a suit I'd never seen before, looking more composed and determined than I'd ever seen him. "Mrs. Vale," Hartwell began, "my client is seeking dissolution of marriage based on adultery and irreconcilable differences. We have substantial documentation supporting these claims." He slid a thick folder across the table to my lawyer. Patricia opened it, and I watched her face change as she flipped through the pages. "What kind of documentation?" I asked. Hartwell consulted his notes. "Text messages between you and Lucas Firth, dating back 4 months. Restaurant receipts showing you dining together on evenings when you told Mr. Vale you were working late. Time-stamped photographs of you entering and leaving Mr. Firth's apartment building. Workplace logs showing discrepancies between your claimed overtime hours and your actual presence in the office." My mouth went dry. "You had me followed?" "I documented my wife's activities," Nathan said quietly. It was the first time he'd spoken since we'd entered the room. "When someone lies to you repeatedly, you start looking for the truth." Patricia leaned forward. "Mr. Hartwell, unless your client has evidence of actual adultery—" "We do." He slid another set of photographs across the table. They showed me and Lucas kissing outside his apartment, embracing in his doorway, clearly intimate in ways that couldn't be explained away as friendship. I felt sick. How did you... I hired a private investigator 6 weeks ago, Nathan said, after I found the hotel receipt in your purse. What hotel receipt? I asked, genuinely confused. Nathan's expression didn't change. The Marriott, downtown, March 15th. You told me you were at your book club that night. I remembered. Lucas and I had gone there when his apartment building was having plumbing issues. I thought I'd been so careful, but apparently I'd kept the receipt out of habit. Nathan, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. This is crazy. We can work through this. Couples survive infidelity all the time. This isn't just about the affair, Hartwell interrupted. We also have documentation of Mrs. Vale's pattern of emotional abuse and public humiliation of my client. Another folder appeared on the table. This one contained screenshots of group text messages where I'd mocked Nathan, audio recordings of my jokes at his birthday party, and witness statements from family members and friends describing my behavior at various social gatherings. The school festival incident was recorded by another parent, Hartwell continued. We have video evidence of Mrs. Vale deliberately humiliating Mr. Vale in front of their daughter's teacher and classmates. I turned to Nathan, desperate now. You recorded me. You've been spying on me for months. I've been protecting myself, he said, and protecting Ella. Ella? What does Ella have to do with this? Patricia finally spoke up. My client is willing to consider a no-fault divorce if we can reach an amicable agreement on custody and assets. Hartwell shook his head. Given the evidence of adultery and the impact of Mrs. Vale's behavior on the child, Ella's teacher has documented increased anxiety and behavioral issues. My client is seeking primary physical custody with supervised visitation for Mrs. Vale until she completes counseling. Supervised visitation? I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. She's my daughter. She's a child who has been exposed to her mother's affair partner and subjected to ongoing conflict in the home, Hartwell replied calmly. Mr. Vale's primary concern is Ella's well-being. I looked at Nathan, this man I'd thought I knew completely, this passive, predictable person I'd been married to for 9 years. He was looking back at me with the same quiet expression he'd always worn, but now I could see something I'd missed before. Not weakness, but patience. Not passivity, but careful planning. How long? I asked. How long have you been planning this? Since Christmas, he said, when you told my entire family that Lucas would have remembered to get you the necklace you wanted. Christmas, that was 5 months ago. For 5 months, while I thought I was controlling the narrative of our marriage, Nathan had been quietly building a case against me. The bank accounts have been frozen pending asset division, Hartwell continued. Mrs. Vale will need to find alternative housing, as the family home will remain with Mr. Vale and Ella to maintain stability for the child. You can't just kick me out of my own house. Actually, Patricia said quietly, reviewing the documents. Given the evidence, they can. Perdita, we need to talk privately. The meeting ended with me signing papers I barely understood and agreeing to a temporary custody arrangement that gave me every other weekend with Ella, supervised by a court-appointed mediator. As we left the building, Nathan caught up with me in the parking lot. Perdita, he said. I turned, hoping for some sign of the man I'd married, some indication that this was all a negotiating tactic. I never wanted it to come to this, he said, but you made it impossible to do anything else. Nathan, please. We have a family. We have a history together. He nodded. We do. And that's exactly why I can't let Ella grow up thinking this is what marriage looks like. He walked away, leaving me standing alone in the parking lot, finally understanding that the quiet, passive man I'd been married to had been anything but passive when it came to protecting what mattered to him. The final hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late September, 6 months after Nathan had first served me with divorce papers. By then, the initial shock had worn off, replaced by a grinding reality that felt like living underwater, everything muffled and strange and harder than it should be. I'd moved into a studio apartment across town, the only place I could afford on my administrative assistant's salary, now that I was paying for my own lawyer, my own car insurance, my own everything. The supervised visits with Ella had been awkward and painful, conducted in a sterile family services office with a social worker taking notes on our interactions. Lucas had disappeared from my life almost immediately after the divorce proceedings began. "I can't be involved in this mess," he'd said when I called him, crying, after that first meeting with the lawyers. "I'm sorry, Perdita, but I have my own life to think about." The man who had told me I deserved better, who had encouraged my dissatisfaction with Nathan, who had promised me passion and adventure, had vanished the moment things got complicated. I was learning that there was a difference between someone who wanted to be your escape and someone who wanted to be your partner. My parents had rallied around me initially, with my mother insisting that Nathan was being vindictive and cruel, but even their support had begun to waver as more details came out. When they saw the evidence Nathan's lawyer had compiled, the photographs, the text messages, the timeline of lies, my father had gone quiet, and my mother had started making comments about taking responsibility for your choices. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, more like a conference room than the dramatic setting I'd imagined. Nathan sat with his lawyer at one table, I sat with mine at another, and Judge Martinez reviewed our case with the detached efficiency of someone who had seen it all before. "Mrs. Vale," the judge said, looking over his glasses at me, "do you contest the allegations of adultery?" I glanced at Patricia, who shook her head slightly. We'd already discussed this. The evidence was overwhelming, and denying it would only make me look worse. "No, Your Honor," I said quietly. "And do you contest the custody arrangement as proposed by Mr. Vale?" This was harder. Every instinct I had screamed against agreeing to give Nathan primary custody, but Patricia had explained the reality to me weeks ago. The court's primary concern was Ella's well-being, and the evidence showed that my behavior had negatively impacted her. The supervised visits, the counseling requirements, the gradual reintroduction to normal custody, it was all designed to help me rebuild my relationship with my daughter. "No, Your Honor," I said again. The judge reviewed the asset division. Nathan would keep the house and most of our savings. I would get my car and a small settlement. It was fair, Patricia had assured me, given the circumstances. "Mr. Vale," the judge said, "do you have anything you'd like to add before I finalize this decree?" Nathan stood up. He looked older than he had 6 months ago, more serious, but also somehow more solid, more present. "Your Honor, I just want to say that I hope Mrs. Vale gets the help she needs to be the mother Ella deserves. Despite everything that's happened, I want her to have a relationship with her daughter." I felt tears start to fall. Even now, even after everything I'd put him through, Nathan was being generous. It was exactly the kind of thing that had always annoyed me about him. His refusal to fight dirty, his insistence on taking the high road. But now, it just made me feel ashamed. "Very well," the judge said. "The marriage between Nathan Vale and Perdita Vale is hereby dissolved. Custody, asset division, and support arrangements are as outlined in the settlement agreement. This court is adjourned." That was it. 9 years of marriage, ended with a gavel and some paperwork. Outside the courthouse, Nathan's family was waiting for him. Doris hugged him tightly, and I could see her whispering something in his ear. Nina was there with Ella, who ran to her father with the kind of uninhibited joy that reminded me of everything I'd lost. My own parents were there too, standing awkwardly to one side. My father approached me first. "Perdita," he said, "we're here to help you pack your things from the house." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As we walked toward our cars, Nathan called my name. I turned, hoping for, what? Forgiveness? A last-minute change of heart? The counselor's name is Dr. Sarah Chen, he said, handing me a business card. She specializes in family therapy. When you're ready, and when she thinks it's appropriate, we can start working on a normal custody schedule. I took the card, our fingers brushing briefly. Nathan, I know, he said. Take care of yourself, Perdita. He walked away then, taking Ella's hand and heading toward his car, where his family was waiting. I watched them drive away, my ex-husband, my daughter, and the life I'd thrown away, because I'd convinced myself I deserved something better. Standing in that courthouse parking lot, holding a business card for a therapist and the keys to a studio apartment, I finally understood what I'd really deserved all along, exactly what I'd gotten. The quiet, steady man I'd mocked for being boring had turned out to be the most decisive person in the room when it mattered. The passive husband I'd thought I could manipulate had been building a careful, methodical case against me, while I was busy thinking I was smarter than everyone else. I'd spent months telling myself I was the victim of an unfulfilling marriage, that I was justified in seeking happiness elsewhere, that Nathan's quiet nature was a weakness I could exploit. But Nathan's quietness hadn't been weakness. It had been strength. The kind of strength that doesn't need to announce itself, that doesn't need to tear others down to build itself up, that simply does what needs to be done to protect what matters most. As I drove away from the courthouse that day, I realized that I'd never really known my husband at all. I'd seen what I wanted to see. A convenient target for my dissatisfaction, a safe option I could take for granted, instead of seeing the man who had been quietly, steadily loving his family, even when that family included someone who couldn't appreciate what she had. The story I'd been telling myself about my marriage, my choices, and my justifications had finally collided with reality, and reality, it turned out, had been keeping much better records than I had. Nathan had nodded and served me divorce papers, and in doing so, he'd served me the truth, that actions have consequences, that love requires respect, and that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who's been paying the most attention all along. Now, sitting in my studio apartment months later, I'm still learning to live with that truth. Some lessons I'm discovering are expensive, and some people, once you've lost them, are impossible to replace. I thought I was controlling the story, but Nathan had been writing the ending all along. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.